The Old West was a land where danger lurked around every corner, and justice was often served at the end of a gun. But among the outlaws and lawmen, there was a special breed of individual, the bounty hunter. These rugged men, and sometimes women, weren't just chasing criminals. They were navigating a lawless frontier in pursuit of justice, money, and a sense of adventure. But what was it really like to be a bounty hunter in the Old West? In this video, we're about to dive into a world of grit, glory, and gunfights that shaped the iconic Wild West we all know today. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. There's plenty more where this came from. Many bounty hunters were more dangerous than the outlaws. While some bounty hunters in the Old West were respected members of society, many others carried less than ideal reputations. In fact, some could be seen as more dangerous than the criminals they pursued. Consider the case of Henry Newton Brown. In 1882, Brown was appointed Assistant Marshal of Caldwell, Kansas, and later promoted to Marshal. The local newspaper, the Caldwell Commercial, praised him as courageous, composed, and virtuous, free from any major flaws. However, what the paper and residents didn't know was that Brown had a dark past. He had once been a member of Billy the Kid's gang and was involved in the 1878 murder of a sheriff during the Lincoln County War in New Mexico. Even after becoming a lawman, Brown's criminal tendencies didn't subside. In 1884, he was granted permission by the mayor of Caldwell to track down a murderer for a $1,200 bounty, only to team up with the criminal for an attempted robbery of the Medicine Lodge Bank. The robbery ended with the death of the bank manager, and Brown and his accomplice were captured. After a mob stormed the jail where they were held, Brown was killed while trying to escape. Then there was Timothy "Longhair" Jim Courtright, the first elected marshal of Fort Worth, Texas, in 1876. Courtright was credited with significantly reducing the city's crime rate. However, his involvement in the city's saloon and gambling scene led to conflicts with business owners who resented his protection rackets. These tensions eventually resulted in a deadly confrontation that ended his life. Perhaps the most infamous of them all was Tom Horn. A former scout, Pinkerton agent, and gunman for hire, Horn became well known as a bounty hunter and tracker in the late 1880s. He was reportedly responsible for the deaths of several individuals, though many of these claims remain uncertain. Ironically, Horn's own life came to an end in 1903 when he was convicted and hanged for the murder of a young boy named Willie Nickel. Many historians believe that Horn was innocent of this crime, casting doubt on the justice of his execution. These examples highlight the complexity of bounty hunters in the Old West. While some upheld the law, many walked a fine line between justice and lawlessness, often operating under questionable motives and methods. John Riley Duncan assisted in the capture of John Wesley Hardin. John Riley Jack Duncan was 26 years old when he joined the Dallas Police Force in 1876. The following year, the Texas Rangers enlisted him as an undercover agent to gather intelligence on the notorious outlaw John Wesley Hardin. If Duncan was successful in locating Hardin, he would receive a portion of the $4,000 bounty. The Rangers suspected that Hardin was hiding in Gonzales County, so Duncan adopted the alias Williams and moved there, taking up work as a laborer and handyman. He carefully integrated himself into the local community, even forming a friendship with Neil Bowen, Hardin's father-in-law, who welcomed Duncan into his home as a boarder. Duncan's efforts paid off when he managed to trick Bowen into writing a letter to Hardin, which revealed that Hardin was staying in Pollard, Alabama, under the name J.H. Swain. Armed with this new information, Duncan devised a plan for the Rangers to capture Hardin. Duncan and fellow Texas Ranger John Armstrong traveled to Alabama, where they learned that Hardin was planning to visit Pensacola, Florida. On August 23, 1877, Duncan Armstrong, along with Escambia County Sheriff William Henry Hutchinson and Deputy A.J. Perdue, successfully apprehended Hardin on a train bound for Pensacola. The capture was a significant achievement, and Duncan and Armstrong split the $4,000 reward. However, Duncan's time with the Texas Rangers was short-lived. After only 4 months of service, he left to become a private detective and bounty hunter in Dallas. Despite his success, Duncan was troubled by recurring dreams in which he was killed by Hardin or one of his associates, as Hardin had sworn to exact revenge on the man responsible for his capture. Ironically, Duncan's death came not at the hands of Hardin or his gang, but from an unexpected source. In February 1878, Duncan was shot by Hattie Washburn, also known as Hattie Bates, a brothel worker. The bullet struck Duncan's lung, and though a silver tube was inserted in his throat to help him speak and breathe, he continued to work for several more years. Tragically, Duncan's life came to an end in a car accident in 1911. Duncan's story reflects both the dangerous and unpredictable nature of life in the Old West. While he was able to capture one of the era's most infamous outlaws, his fate shows how even the most skilled and determined individuals could be caught off guard by unexpected events. Most bounty hunters were peace officers. While popular literature and movies often depict bounty hunters as solitary figures or groups of gunfighters unaffiliated with official institutions, the reality was different. Most bounty hunters in the Old West were lawmen who took on extra work to supplement their modest incomes. For example, Lincoln County Sheriff Pat Garrett collected a reward in 1881 for capturing Billy the Kid. Many others were affiliated with private agencies, such as the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, or worked on behalf of banks or railroad companies. In a study of 255 gunfighters from the period, only 3 fit the lone bounty hunter image commonly portrayed in media, and even they pursued this line of work only occasionally. The inconsistent and typically modest rewards made it difficult for anyone to rely solely on bounty hunting as a livelihood. In Garrett's case, New Mexico Governor Lew Wallace published an advertisement offering a reward for Billy the Kid's capture. The notice read, "Billy the Kid, $500 reward. I will pay $500 reward to any person or persons who will capture William Bonney, alias the Kid, and deliver him to any sheriff of New Mexico. Satisfactory proofs of identity will be required. Lew Wallace, New Mexico." However, when Garrett attempted to claim the reward, Wallace argued that the offer was personal and did not legally bind the territory of New Mexico. Garrett insisted, and ultimately, he did receive the $500, but only after local citizens, frustrated by the governor's refusal, raised an additional $1,150 to support him. This story highlights the practical challenges and sometimes unpredictable nature of bounty hunting in the Old West. Despite the iconic portrayals, most bounty hunters were simply law officers looking to make ends meet rather than independent adventurers. Charlie Siringo was a Pinkerton detective who went undercover. Charlie Siringo stands out as one of the most notable detectives of the 19th century, spending much of his career with the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Before joining Pinkerton, Siringo worked as a cowboy. In the 1870s, he was employed at the 60 Ranch, where he once led a posse to track down Billy the Kid after the outlaw stole cattle from the ranch. In 1884, Siringo married and transitioned from cowboy life to become a merchant. However, by 1886, he moved to Chicago and joined the Pinkerton Agency with Pat Garrett, a well-known lawman and the man who famously captured Billy the Kid. Providing his reference, Siringo spent the next 22 years as a Pinkerton detective, completing hundreds of arrests over his career. Siringo frequently worked undercover. In the late 1890s, he infiltrated Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch by assuming the identity of a gunman named Charles L. Carter, who was said to be fleeing from the law. After the Wild Bunch carried out the Wilcox train robbery in 1899, Siringo was assigned to pursue the gang alongside fellow Pinkerton agent Tom Horn. Their efforts led to the arrest of several Wild Bunch members, including Kid Curry, although Cassidy and the Sundance Kid managed to escape to Bolivia, where reports suggest they later died in a confrontation with Bolivian soldiers. In 1907, after a distinguished career, Siringo retired from Pinkerton, closing a remarkable chapter in the history of Wild West detective work. Mickey Free was kidnapped by Apaches as a boy. Felix Tellus, born around 1848 in Mexico, later became known as Mickey Free and grew up in the Arizona Territory. At age 12, he was reportedly taken by the Pinal Apache. In late January 1861, a U.S. military expedition, led by Second Lieutenant George N. Bascom, set out to find the boy. Bascom arranged a meeting with Cochise, the Chiricahua Apache chief, mistakenly believing Cochise's group had captured Tellus. When Cochise denied involvement, Bascom threatened to detain him until the boy was returned. Cochise managed to escape, but Bascom held the other Apache members in his party. In response, Cochise took hostages from a nearby stage station and later killed 3 of them, while Bascom ordered the hanging of Cochise's brother and 2 nephews. This tragic episode shattered the tenuous peace between the U.S. military and the Chiricahua Apache. Raised among the Apache, Tellus was eventually retrieved years later during a U.S. raid on the Apache camp where he lived. Renamed Mickey Free, he was hired as an interpreter in 1874 due to his fluency in Apache and Spanish, though he reportedly didn't speak English. He soon became a notable Apache scout working alongside the U.S. military. In the 1880s, Donald McIntosh, the biracial son of another scout, described his first impression of Free. "I was only 15 years old then, and I had never seen anything quite like Mickey Free. He had big cavalry boots on, the kind that came up high above the knee, and a big pistol belt around his waist, and in it he carried 2 big dragoon pistols. He presented a fine figure in the prime of his life." Beyond scouting, Free occasionally took on bounty hunting work. One of his more challenging targets was the Apache Kid, with some accounts suggesting that Free may have been responsible for the man's death. Mickey Free's life bridged multiple cultures, leaving a complex legacy in the history of the American Southwest. The notorious Dunn Brothers dabbled in robbery and cattle rustling. The 5 Dunn brothers, B, Calvin, Dal, George, and Bill, hailed from Pawnee, Oklahoma. They operated a boarding ranch near Ingalls, where stories suggest they occasionally offered shelter to outlaws. Rumor also holds that some travelers who stayed at the ranch met unfortunate ends. Besides managing the ranch, the Dunns ran a meat market in Pawnee, a convenient setup for handling cattle they were said to have acquired through rustling. One account suggests the Dunn brothers struck a deal with local law enforcement to aid in capturing members of the Doolin-Dalton gang. In return, the authorities would drop any cattle rustling charges against them. The Dunn's younger sister, Rose, was romantically involved with George Bitter Creek Newcomb, a member of the Doolin-Dalton gang. On May 2, 1895, Newcomb and fellow gang member Charlie Pierce arrived at the Dunn Ranch to visit Rose. Accounts vary on what happened next. According to some reports, the brothers informed law enforcement, leading to Newcomb and Pierce's deaths. Other sources suggest that the Dunns took matters into their own hands, ending the lives of both men. Regardless of how events unfolded, Pierce and Newcomb were killed, and the Dunns claimed a bounty of $5,000 per outlaw. Later that year, on August 25, 1896, Bill Dunn, known as the leader among his brothers, guided U.S. Deputy Marshal Heck Thomas and his posse to a location where outlaw Bill Doolin was hiding. Doolin reportedly resisted capture, leading to his death in the ensuing gunfire. While some reports credit Thomas with the fatal shot, others suggest Bill Dunn may have been responsible. By late 1896, community complaints about the Dunn brothers' activities were increasing. Deputy Sheriff Frank Canton, once an outlaw himself, had previously attempted to arrest the brothers for their involvement in the deaths of Pierce and Newcomb, but couldn't make the charges stick. Canton took renewed interest in investigating the complaints, which angered Bill Dunn, who vowed to confront Canton. On November 6, 1896, Bill Dunn encountered Canton outside a restaurant. When Dunn reached for his gun, Canton responded quickly, resulting in Dunn's death. The incident was ruled as self-defense, effectively ending the Dunn brothers' activities as bounty hunters. The term bounty hunter didn't gain its current meaning until the 1950s. From Henry Fonda's portrayal in The Tin Star to Clint Eastwood's role in Unforgiven, Hollywood has featured bounty hunters prominently in many Western films. These movies, along with novels and news reports, have contributed to various myths about the Wild West. They also helped popularize the term bounty hunter to describe mostly male lawmen and gunfighters who pursued, captured, and sometimes dealt with criminals of all kinds. The word bounty itself dates back to the early 1300s, originating with a meaning of kindness or goodness. It wasn't until the early 1700s that it took on the sense of a reward, specifically referring to bonuses offered to entice men to join the military or naval forces. By the 1800s, bounty hunter was used to describe individuals who received payment for gathering animal pelts or bird specimens rather than those pursuing outlaws. The modern use of bounty hunter to describe people who pursued criminals emerged later in popular culture. American Western writer Norman A. Fox introduced this meaning in 1953, followed by novelist and screenwriter Elmore Leonard in 1954, solidifying the term's association with the pursuit of outlaws. Most bounties were for a few $100s. Contrary to what many Western movies might imply, being a bounty hunter wasn't exactly a fast track to wealth. While significant rewards were occasionally offered for high-profile outlaws, like the combined $40,000 reward for Jesse and Frank James, or the $15,000 bounty for members of the Dalton gang, these were exceptions rather than the rule. Other infamous figures, such as Billy the Kid or Cole Younger, had bounties around $5,000, while Butch Cassidy's was set at $4,000. Though these sums were substantial, most rewards were far more modest, often totaling less than $100. In reality, bounty hunting was rarely as lucrative as popular portrayals would suggest. The 1872 Supreme Court case, Taylor versus Taintor, arguably. For nearly a century and a half, bounty hunters, law enforcement officials, and bail bondsmen have often referenced a specific paragraph from an 1872 Supreme Court case to support their rights in apprehending and returning a fugitive. The case, Taylor versus Taintor, centered on an $8,000 cash bond posted for Edward McGuire, who was facing grand larceny charges in Connecticut. While awaiting trial, McGuire returned to his home state of New York. Unbeknownst to the Connecticut bondsman, McGuire was also wanted for a separate felony in Maine. Acting on a request from Maine's governor, New York's governor approved McGuire's extradition to Maine, where he was convicted on a burglary charge and imprisoned. When McGuire did not appear in Connecticut for his court date, the bail was forfeited. Seeking relief, the Connecticut bondsman argued that McGuire's absence was beyond his control due to the extradition to Maine, which he believed should qualify as an intervening act of law under the Constitution's extradition clause. However, the Supreme Court ruled that the bail bondsman was responsible for McGuire's appearance in court and that the extradition clause did not excuse this obligation. Although this ruling did not establish a binding legal precedent, bounty hunters often highlight a specific passage from the majority opinion in Taylor vs. Taintor for guidance. This passage states, in part, that when bail is given, the individual is effectively under the control of their sureties, who can detain or return them as necessary. It suggests that the sureties, or those they authorize, may pursue the individual across state lines, make an arrest on a Sunday, and if necessary, enter the individual's residence to do so. This paragraph, though not legally binding, has influenced the methods and scope of action for bounty hunters to this day. The Fugitive Slave Acts led to some bounty hunters kidnapping free black people. The United States passed its first Fugitive Slave Act in 1793, authorizing local authorities to capture and return individuals who had escaped from enslavement. Under this law, enslavers and their representatives could search for escapees across state lines, even in free states. If an alleged escapee was apprehended, the captor would present evidence before a judge to confirm that the individual was enslaved. If the court accepted the evidence, the enslaver could legally return the person to their home state. The law also imposed a $500 fine on anyone found to have helped an escaped person. Resistance to this act was widespread, particularly in northern states where slavery had been abolished. Some of these states went further by passing personal liberty laws, which provided protections for accused escapees, such as the right to a jury trial. These laws also safeguarded free black residents, as there were cases where bounty hunters wrongfully abducted free black individuals and sold them into slavery. Solomon Northup's memoir, 12 Years a Slave, captures such an experience. Northup, born a free black man in New York, was deceived into traveling to Washington, D.C., where he was then kidnapped and sold into slavery in 1841. The legal standing of personal liberty laws was questioned in the 1842 Supreme Court case Prigg versus Pennsylvania, centered on Edward Prigg, a bounty hunter from Maryland who had been convicted of abducting a woman he believed to be an escaped enslaved person. The Supreme Court ruled in Prigg's favor, establishing that federal law overruled any state laws that interfered with the Fugitive Slave Act. However, despite this decision, many northern states still refused to enforce the act. This resistance prompted the federal government to pass a second Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, which put even greater pressure on citizens to assist in capturing escapees. The new law denied the right to a jury trial for alleged escapees and raised the penalties for aiding them or obstructing the law to a $1,000 fine and 6 months in jail. Additionally, the act increased the role of bounty hunting by placing cases in the hands of federal commissioners who were financially incentivized to return escapees, receiving higher pay for confirming capture than for setting a person free. James Kirker worked with Mexico to capture Indian warriors. James Kirker, an infamous figure among bounty hunters, was originally from Ireland. He arrived in the United States at age 16, initially working as a privateer and merchant. After a time, he moved to New Mexico, where he spent about 10 years trapping beaver pelts, mining, and trading livestock with the Apache people. In 1835, Kirker became a naturalized citizen of Mexico, and by 1839, he had signed the first of 4 contracts with the governor of Chihuahua. These contracts tasked him with combating the Apache, Comanche, and Navajo tribes, who were actively raiding northern Mexico. To fulfill his mission, Kirker assembled a team of about 25 fighters, known as the Sahuanos, or Shawnees. This group included a diverse mix of white Americans, Mexicans, escaped slaves, and Native American fighters from the Delaware, Creek, and Shawnee tribes. For his first contract, Kirker was offered $100,000, while subsequent contracts paid him based on the number of prisoners and scalps he brought back. He became well known for his efficiency in these campaigns, though by 1846, the government of Chihuahua could no longer fund him for this work. Instead, they offered him a commission in the Mexican army with the rank of colonel. Kirker declined this offer and instead enlisted with the 1st Regiment of Missouri Mounted Volunteers to serve in the Mexican-American War. His choice to fight against Mexico resulted in the Mexican government labeling him a traitor and placing a 10,000 peso bounty on his head. Kirker survived the conflict and later settled in California, where he lived out his remaining years, passing away in 1852. The highest bounty offered in the Wild West may have been $25,000 for Jesse James. Jesse James and his older brother Frank rank among the most notorious outlaws in the history of the Old West. Following the Civil War, the two became part of several outlaw groups, with the James Younger Gang being the most prominent. Based in Missouri, the gang was active from about 1868 to 1876, gaining infamy for their bold bank and train robberies and for violent acts that left a lasting mark on their reputation. The James Younger Gang eventually disbanded in 1876 after a failed bank robbery attempt in Northfield, Minnesota. This incident led to the capture or death of several gang members. However, the James brothers managed to escape and continued their criminal activities for a few more years. In 1882, Missouri Governor Thomas T. Crittenden placed a substantial reward on their capture, offering $25,000 for Jesse, dead or alive, and $15,000 for Frank. Together, this $40,000 bounty would be roughly equal to $2.4 million in today's value. 2020. Secret meetings were reportedly held between Crittenden and Bob Ford, a new member of the James Gang, whom Jesse had invited to live in his household. On April 3, 1882, Ford took Jesse's life, shooting him from behind while Jesse was dusting a picture, thereby claiming the reward. This $25,000 bounty is considered one of the largest rewards for an outlaw. To place it in perspective, a far larger sum had been offered outside of the Old West. Following President Abraham Lincoln's assassination, the U.S. War Department posted a reward for John Wilkes Booth and his accomplices, $50,000 specifically for Booth himself. In today's terms, that total $100,000 would amount to around $9.8 million. 2020. The Old West bounty hunters were more than just legends. They were ruthless, cunning, and often feared by both outlaws and lawmen alike. The new revelations about their lives give us a deeper understanding of what made them so formidable. But there's still so much more to uncover about the untold stories of these real-life icons. If you want to learn more shocking facts and behind-the-scenes details about the Wild West, don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming next.